Welcome back to GAOK Annual Meeting 2021. We are providing a simultaneous interpretation now, and you can ask questions through Q&A window during the presentation. Our second speaker is Linda Tobashi. She is the Senior Advisor for Education in KoreaSociety. She used to be a Senior Director at World Education Service and served as U.S. Peace Corps volunteer in Korea. And she is frequent presenter on international educational partnerships. Today, she will introduce the KoreaSociety and its programs in the aspect of public diplomacy. Before hearing her lecture, let's watch a video clip about the introduction of KoreaSociety. It will help you understand what it is and what they are doing. Video clip, please. Linda Tobashi, thank you for your patience. How are you?
I'm fine. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. You have a much better background display than our previous meeting.
Oh, you're in my house.
Yeah. I can see some R's. Yeah. Gorgeous.
Yeah, thank
Okay.
you.
When you are ready, you can start now.
Okay, well, I'm really honored to be speaking with you this morning. So, 안녕하세요. 처음 뵙겠습니다. And I have to say that Dr. Kang is a hard act to follow, but I'll do my best. I hope that you enjoyed the Korea Society video, which is a brief but very thorough overview of our programming. But I welcome this opportunity to share a bit more about the Korea Society. We're one of those subnational actors. We're an NGO. We're a non-governmental organization, not for profit, nonpartisan. We're neither Democratic or Republican. And as you can see on the next slide, that our focus is on promoting greater awareness and understanding and cooperation between the people of the U.S. and the people on Korea. And on this next slide as well, you can see that we educate the U.S. Thank you. Educate the U.S. Public on matters of importance to the U.S.-Korea relationship and on diverse Korea-related topics. We do this under what I would call our fearless leadership of our chair of our board, Ambassador Kathleen Stevens, and our president, Thomas Byrne, and CEO. And I think, as you can see from these two key goals, that in other words, we advance public diplomacy in its broadest sense by facilitating understanding and by facilitating positive interactions between Americans and Koreans. And we do this on a range of topics, from policy to economics to trade, and from to inter and intra-Korean relations and security, to issues of health, to sports, as well as numerous areas in the arts and culture and education. But as you'll see on the next slide, it's how do we do this? Well, we do this by providing opportunities. We provide opportunities for thought leaders in the US and in Korea to share their knowledge and expertise, to do that both in person and virtually. And what I would say one of the advantages of the COVID-19 is that it's actually increased, I think, dialogue, because we do things in person at the Korea Society, but we've been doing everything since March of 2020 virtually. And so we've been able to expand our outreach and expand the number of events and programs that we have. So, but again, we convene thought leaders and provide a platform for them. We provide opportunities for artists to showcase their work, and for educators to share best practices and to have access to resources that they can use in their classrooms. And for individuals to explore Korean history, culture, film, literature, art, language. In fact, that lower picture you see there, the king, the virtuous queen, and the wicked consort is actually probably showing this evening, actually now as I speak. We also, if we see on the next slide, that we do this by providing forums, forums for groups of people to come together. So forums for decision makers to engage in lively discussions, and for example, through our UN dialogues. We also, and you saw this in our video as well, for our leaders for leaders in their respective fields in advancing public diplomacy to be recognized. And as you can see here, it's, we have the chairman of the Korea Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Youngman Park, and BTS were our 2020 recipients. And this is through our Van Fleet Award. And this is named after General James A. Van Fleet, who was the commander of U.S. forces, in the final phase of the Korean War. But he also, in 1957, started an organization that actually set the framework from which the Korea Society evolved. We have forums where we bring together experts and individuals to network. And then we have forums and programs for travel and exchange. I believe in our exchange programming is where we have very, very strong opportunities to develop local partnerships. And so, as you'll see on the next slide, I am thrilled, very thrilled, to be able to share with you information about our Project Bridge Youth Ambassador Program. This is a program that's very near and dear to my heart. It's from the point of its inception through to today. I believe it's a very good example of how connecting people can have long-lasting influence and impact. As we see on the next slide, it is our oldest program that the Society offers. It's longest running. It is very special because it's geared to young people. It's geared to high school students who come from very diverse ethnic backgrounds and diverse schools. And it really instills in many of them a lifelong interest in Korea and an understanding of the ties that bind our two countries, which ultimately I think is the goal of public diplomacy. The program is funded through the generous support of the Korea Foundation, through the CDK Kochon Foundation, and through the Hwang family. And on the next slide, we see that it was established in 1993 and initially called Kids to Korea. It was created by the KoreaSociety in New York and the Pacific Century Institute in Los Angeles. And it was created in response to the 1992 Los Angeles riots, which among the Korean community in the United States, the Korean American community in the United States, is referred to as Saaigu, as that's April 29th, and that was when the riots opened up against the Korean community in LA. The target audience was an urban audience, an African-American audience, and youth, high school students, and the intent was to foster understanding. And the intent of the program to this day remains to foster understanding. But also, as you can see here, healing, especially after the devastating results of the riots in LA. As we fast forward to the future, and as we see on the next slide, there have been many changes over the past 28 years, but it is still the KoreaSociety in New York and the Pacific Century Institute in LA that are the key partners in this endeavor. Our audience is urban youth, each year 16 students, 8 in New York and 8 in California, are selected through a very rigorous process to participate. They come from a range of backgrounds. They come from a range of schools. And as you can see, this is our current cohort. The students in New York are at the KoreaSociety, so this was before COVID-19 shut us down in March, and they're engaging with the Ik Jang-kang's Moonjar Longing for Home exhibition. And this was part of a workshop that we were doing with them where we were exploring inter-Korean relations and reconciliation. And the picture you have of the Los Angeles students they're on a field trip visiting a local shrine. Over the years, the program has expanded and to include other aspects. We now have volunteer group leaders. These are typically high school teachers in the public school system, and these group leaders really play a tremendous role in advancing what I call the multiplier effect, the ripple effect in their communities, in their schools, because they bring back to their high schools in which they work. Most of them are teachers, and they share their experiences and what they learn with their communities, and they bring it into their classrooms. I think also these group leaders are a testament to the impact of this program. For example, our current group leader in New York, was Bonnie Garcia, is a high school teacher, but 11 years ago, he was a youth ambassador and part of Project Bridge. And for many of our alumni, and again, this is the power of public diplomacy, right, of soft power, that, you know, Korea has become a lifelong interest. We also have an additional partner, which is on the next page, thank you. In 2020, we engaged in a partnership with the Mike and Maureen Mansfield Center at the University of Montana in Missoula, Montana. And we're quite excited about this because number one, it's our first new partner since the inception. Number two, it establishes a rural demography. It brings in a rural voice and also adds a Native American Indigenous peoples view and perspective. And importantly for the Mansfield Center, it advances our ability to expand their programming to Korea. They offer many youth exchange programs in Asia and around the world, but they did not have a connection with Korea. So by joining Project Bridge, they've been able to expand that Korea, add Korea to their repertoire. If we look at the next slide, we'll see that, you know, over the years too, the program has evolved into really a full academic year-long program. And students engage in numerous workshops and a wide range of topics, Korean history, the Korean War, education in Korea. They're fascinated by the lives of Korean high school students. They explore arts and culture. They explore both the cultural and the economic factors, for example, that led to the Miracle on the Han. And just how special, you know, the tremendous progress that Korea made in a very short period of time was, unparalleled in the world. They meet with expert speakers. They have hands-on experiences. As you can see, our Missoula students are learning how to make kimbap. And the program culminates in a community presentation where students share what they've experienced, what they've learned with their families, with their friends, with their teachers, with former Project Bridge alumni. And these programs are open to the community. If we can see on the next slide that up until COVID, these workshops were generally in person, and so they were handled separately by the three different groups. But one of the advantages of COVID is it's forced us to go virtual. And by going virtual, we've had some great opportunities. First of all, we now have monthly joint workshops with all the students together, talking about a common theme, and we're able to bring in many more outside speakers. We're not limited to speakers in our immediate area. So here's just two examples. You can see Laurel Kendall, who's an expert in shamanism, who's at the American Museum of Natural History, spoke with the group. Jian Beck, Harvard University, shared her research and her writing on sort of North Korea's hidden revolution, as she calls it, which is the information underground that's transforming, you know, North Korea. She calls the closed society. We've had Dr. Pak from Marymount Loyola University in LA speak to them about what's LA like? What's the Korean American and the Black community relations now, today, you know, nearly 30 years after the riots. In April, we'll have a professor speaking with us from Stanford who will address soft power, Korea's soft power, and the impact of Korean Wave. But all that said, and wonderful programming, wonderful workshops, the biggest highlight of the program component that everyone looks forward to and is the most memorable is, as we'll see on the next slide, the study tour. Every year since the program's inception, with the exception of last year, 2020, there has been a 10-day study tour to Korea. And students can see and experience firsthand and with Koreans in Korea, what they've been studying and what they've been exploring all year. They gain a deeper understanding of Korea and the unique and close relationship between the US and Korea. And it's a very powerful experience. They have abundant opportunities to engage with Korean high school students and teachers, corporate leaders, government officials, journalists, monks, and many others. And they explore historical and cultural sites. They experience both the city and rural life. They travel extensively in Seoul. They visit Busan, and they travel throughout Jeollabuk-do and Gyeongsang-buk-do. But as we'll see on the next slide, the success of the program really depends on local relationships. The success of the trip and the richness of the experience that the students have is very much dependent on the support and engagement we receive from both national, provincial, and local representatives that we've sort of cultured over the years. As you can see, and we've just named a very limited number of them. There are many, many more, but we have corporate and business sponsors with whom we work, schools, and the government as well. And of particular importance, if we look on the next slide, we can see that the provincial support we receive is really invaluable. We work closely with representatives from Jeollabuk-do and from Gyeongsang-buk-do, and their assistance and input is critical and makes our touring time in these provinces quite special and very rich. We meet with provincial representatives. The province reps that we work with help arrange so that we visit high schools. We frequently have homestays with high school students. They ensure that we visit historical and cultural sites and speak with people and other things that are of current importance in the province. In other words, they determine what and who they would like to showcase. Students come away, I would have to say, with a sense of the uniqueness and a flavor of the provinces. And as you know, each province does have its own uniqueness about it. And so being able to work with governmental reps who can assist us in sort of pointing us in what's most important to them. But I'd also like to say that we recognize the importance of giving the students this sense of a flavor of the provinces. And while in 10 days we can't visit every single province, we do try to cover as much as we can in our workshops. For example, right now the students are reading The Island of Sea Women, and they're just intrigued and fascinated by Jeju-do. They're fascinated by the culture, by the mythology, by the history, and really by the dramatic geography. And another example is sometimes it's actually it's a student who shows this interest. Right now, one of our students is working on her community presentation, and she's decided to spotlight food, but not just Korean food, period, but actually she's diving into Korean food and the specialties and differences of food in the different provinces. As I mentioned, last year's trip was canceled, and we do have, as we say, our fingers crossed for a trip this year in 2021, but we know that's still very much in the air. So in terms of continuing this dialogue, this sort of soft diplomacy, soft power that I would say, we're actually in the process now of exploring virtual engagement with the groups that we would normally meet in Korea. We are this spring going to have contact with at least one of the high schools, and we're right now connecting so that we can have the students connect virtually with the students that they would see. If it turns out that we can't go to Korea, we're definitely going to use virtual means to meet with the representatives that we normally would see, perhaps virtual tours of some of the sites that we would see. And if this works out well, We know there's challenges with, time differences, but we think that we can work this out, and we hope to expand on sort of the virtual exchange throughout the program in future years, so that students, have that connection virtually with representatives, and that will make it all so much more rewarding when they meet face to face. I also wanted to share one other program with you, which again is sort of more at the national level rather than the sub-national level. And that's the U.S. Congressional Study Group on Korea. This was established in 2018 in partnership with the Korea Foundation and the U.S. Association of Former Congressional Members of Congress. There have been 2 trips so far, one in 2018 and one in 2019. The 2020 trip obviously had to be canceled. It's, as you can see here, our president, Thomas Byrne, accompanied 6 congressional members to Korea, and they met with South Korean officials and reinforced the importance of the mutually beneficial U.S. and ROK military alliance, but also the economic alliance and relationship, and the key importance of cultural exchange. What I wanted to share with you here is just one morning and sort of the role that Busan played in staging a program that was really very, very well received and had a great impact. I will confess the pictures that you're seeing there were not taken in Busan, but the meeting was the mayor of Busan hosted a breakfast meeting and really showcased the city and the province. They met with local government officials. They held discussions with the local shipping industry leaders, and also with academics. I think these types of face-to-face interactions can be so key. And so these are just some examples of what a subnational actor can do, what an NGO can do in terms of advancing public diplomacy. And before we move to questions and comments, I just wanted to share on a personal note and to stress, I think, the importance of these types of public diplomacy efforts. At the time, they may seem very small, right? We bring 16 students. With Missoula in the future, it'll be 20 to 24 students to Korea for 10 days. And you might think, well, what's the impact? But I think the long-term ripple effect can really be tremendous. And I'd say I'm a good example of that. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Korea in the late 70s. I was in Cheongju, Chungcheongbuk-do, and I taught English at Cheongju Namjimhakyo. And I have to say it changed my life. It really did. And I'm sure I speak for most Peace Corps volunteers, if not all of them, when I say that it inspired in me and in us a lifelong interest in Korea and a love for Korea. This was a country that I knew very little about, before I went. And it also set me on my career path. For me, it was in international education, but for others, it's many different paths. So Ambassador Stevens, I think, she was a Peace Corps volunteer, and, her path was into public service and diplomacy. For Thomas Byrne, he was a Peace Corps volunteer, and for him it was, economics, Moody Financials, where he was an expert on Asia. For others, it's in health. For many Peace Corps volunteers, they came back and they became part of Korean study. They became academics. They helped develop and launch and advance Korean studies in the United States. And I would say that in our Project Bridge Youth Ambassadors, I'm seeing a similar pattern. They stay involved. They keep in touch. They really encourage others to apply for the program. They come and speak with the students about their experience as a Project Bridge Youth Ambassador and how it's informed sort of their lives now. Many of them, when they go to university, they they do their study abroad in Korea. They look for schools that will have a study abroad program in Korea. And so that's an impact, and that's a multiplier effect, because as they talk, they share their experience and love of Korea with other folks. So I want to thank you for your time and your attention, and let's open this up to questions and comments.
Okay, all right. You did a great job. Thank you for your presentation. We have 4 questions for you, and we have 10 minutes. We have to time management. I think of several questions. Here is my first question for you. People call you an international education specialist. You worked on education programs in various parts of the world, including Iraq. There must have been challenges and difficulties to work as an international education specialist. What motivations made you devote your entire life to this field?
Well, I think number one, it's just a curiosity. And I have to say that I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, a very small, sort of depressed area, where there wasn't much knowledge of the world. And so it was that Peace Corps experience in Korea that opened my eyes to the world and a curiosity about the world. But I believe that it is through education and through educational exchange that one really has great influence. You take people and you take young minds and you take thought leaders, and you can bring them together and convene folks together from very different backgrounds to sort of, come to a goal of sort of, just as I think David so well explained, getting people together to just talk, right? And exchange ideas, and not necessarily always to agree. And so for me, it is that focus on international education. I also think because the US we're such a large country, and we sort of have 2 oceans on either side. We're in some ways isolated from the world. And so it's through international education, it's through exchange of students, it's through sometimes forcing US students to go abroad and have an experience with the world is really, really key.
Good. Okay, here's the second question. You mentioned that a youth exchange program was created after the 1992 Los Angeles riots. Could you explain in detail how American students' perception of Korea changed through this program?
Well, I think, again, I can't speak from the sort of 1993 experience. I think that but I've talked with people who worked on that program, and they said it was really phenomenal. There was a lot of misunderstandings between the Black community in Los Angeles and the Korean community in Los Angeles. And that could be another whole topic that we just talk about, and what happened in terms of sort of controlling those riots in some areas of LA, but letting them sort of, spread like wildfire through the Korean community. But I think that it's, over time, it's just an understanding of another part of the world. Most of our Project Bridge students are not, they're African American, they're Latino. They come from the subcontinent, so they're of Indian descent, they're of Middle Eastern descent. But they're early on, I can't tell you what drove them to the program. I do know now with our current students, it is a success. They're testaments to the success of Korea's soft power. When we ask students, why did you apply to the program? It's like, because I love K-drama. I want to understand more about, Korea. I love the movies. I'm attracted to this culture. I want to learn more about it. I love BTS, and they have a whole litany of pop groups that I'm not so familiar with myself, but they want to learn more about Korea and about Koreans. They want to go, they want to visit Korea. And what I can say is it really does spike in interest. We had one student she graduated, she's going on to college. She's studying chemical engineering, but she went and she picked the college to attend because they have that option in the US, or many of them do, that had a Korean studies program. Because she said, I want to learn Korean language. I want to continue. We introduced them a bit to Korean language, but I want to still continue my Korean language, and I want to take courses, which again, with the flexibility in the U.S. higher education system you can do. She wanted to continue taking courses about Korea and understand better about the relationship between the U.S. and Korea.
All right, let's go forward. Here's a question from a participant. After the COVID pandemic, Korean local governments have been interacting with the US local governments online. The same goes for news exchanges. However, there must be a limit to the depth and authenticity of the program. Please suggest a way to overcome these limitations.
Oh, I think that's a great question. So thank your participant. I personally, I've taught for a number of years as well, and I've taught in face-to-face mode, but I've also taught online. And so I think that when you're in a virtual environment, if possible, to be able to come in together face-to-face is really, it's very important, it's critical. But if it's not possible, there are ways to structure the interaction among the parties. And let's say if this is youth exchange, right? And many of them now are so comfortable. And in fact, students are much more comfortable in the online environment, I think, than many of us who are older. But you can structure activities around that can be very rich and fulfilling. And again, breaking into smaller groups. I think that one good example that I've seen of this is a program in a high school. Again, it's not with Korea, but it's a consortium of 15 schools in 15 different countries. And they have an intercultural club, and the students in that intercultural club work with one another. But they do it over 3 years. My daughter was in one of those. And when she finished high school, she said, I have friends all around the world, and some of them come and visit one another. So again, I think that while there are limitations when it's only virtual, there's actually great opportunities as well. But it is in the programming, it's setting up the topics and the discussions in such a way, and this is true for adults as well, to make sure that you're sort of mining the right questions and encouraging a lot of interaction, which means sort of focusing them on group work and tangible projects or products that they can produce.
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, this is our final question for you. Let's pretend that I'm a youth exchange program manager working for local government in Korea. If I want to run an exchange program between Korea and the United States next spring and fall, what would be the proper timeline to prepare for the plan? Please advise us on planning a program, such as finding a partner organization and planning a budget. Please.
Oh, That again is a very good question and a very long
Very
question.
practical question, actually.
Yeah, it's a very practical question. I think one of the things to be aware of, and if it's a youth programming and school, or if you're talking about an undergraduate program at the higher ed level, what makes it a bit challenging with the U.S. is that it is so decentralized, and Dr. Kang touched upon this. You know, it's these sister to sister cities, that kind of thing. It's because it is local. It happens at a local level, and so it's almost finding who is the right partner. I think that there's obviously there's centers of Korean studies at universities that sometimes will have relationships with their high schools and the local communities in which they're located, and they're a good place to start to ask about recommendations. They would know where there's interest. One of the things in terms of a youth exchange, if it was a high school to a high school, and we can send information, but for example, the American Association of Teachers of Korean actually spotlights what they call honors schools. They have an honor society, and they list the schools throughout the US that actually have Korean studies, that teach Korean language. And so those are good places, what I say, to mine in the research. And you already know, hey, these schools are already, for their local communities, doing a lot of Korean programming. So you know that there's an interest there and probably somewhat of an infrastructure. In terms of a timeline, I always like to say 18 months to get anything started. I don't know, David, feel free to unmute here and please jump in, because I'm sure you have a lot of experience on this. But definitely, I mean, it's not, I would say a minimum of 9 months. I think it takes about a year to at least establish that relationship, to set up the programming, to select the students. You also, I like to say, you have to have people within your school that they're promoters, right? They're going to go and promote this and say, yeah, we want to do this and let's move it forward. So, getting the people in the schools that are going to do those in their respective sites, and then set up the programming for the year. In terms of funding, if it's all virtual, well, it can be pretty inexpensive, right? But if we're talking about study tours, then sometimes the city or the location that you're aiming for can have a big impact on the budget. New York is a lot more expensive than say some other communities. So yeah, so funding. But I know that within Korea, and Korea Foundation, for example, is extremely supportive of these kind of programs. Again, too, the most you can make that local to local connection, and then the people to people connection, you can actually dramatically cut down your costs if there is a face-to-face component, because you're basically working out homestays. And then I think within the US community, there are a number of people and speakers who could come and address groups and who are very generous with their time. And so wouldn't necessarily charge a per diem or honorarium. So I hope that answers your question. I'm not quite sure if it does, but definitely allow, as if it's a first launching of a program, a year to dot all the I's and cross all the T's, as we say.
All right, that's enough. That's enough for my question. Okay, time is up. Thank you for joining us today, Linda. Let's keep in touch.
Absolutely, thank you.
This webinar was valuable for local governments to expand their perspective in public diplomacy in order to make a plan to reconnect and rebuild strong relationship with their sister cities and friendship cities. Thank you all for your participation and cooperation. Happy and safe spring season. See you next time.